Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to dive into a really fascinating new clue in the whole puzzle of obesity. It's something hidden deep inside our DNA, but probably not in the way you're thinking.
So here's the big question that's going to frame our whole discussion. What if the key to understanding a disease isn't some simple, consistent mistake in our genetic code, but something more like chaos, a kind of instability in how our genes are being controlled?
Okay, but to really get this, we got to start with the basics. We need to talk about the software that's running on our DNA hardware.
Well, that software is a field called epigenetics. It's basically a layer of instructions sitting on top of our DNA that tells our genes when to switch on and when to switch off. Think of it this way. Your DNA is the cookbook with all the recipes, but epigenetics, that's the chef who decides which recipes to actually make today.
And one of the most important ways this happens is through these tiny little chemical tags called methylation tags. Honestly, the easiest way to picture them is as millions of tiny dimmer switches stuck all over your DNA, turning the activity of your genes up or down.
So for the longest time, when scientists were hunting for clues about a disease, they'd compare two groups, let's say a healthy group and a sick group, and they'd look for spots where the average setting on those dimmer switches was different. In this chart here, it's a perfect example. You can see the average for the obese group, those are the red dots, is just clearly higher than the average for the lean group in black.
But then, a really brilliant idea popped up from a totally different field, cancer research.
You see, they started noticing that with cancer cells, the average wasn't always the whole story. Something else was going on. Sometimes, those genetic switches were just all over the place. They were messy, unpredictable.
Okay, let me break this down with an analogy. It makes it super clear. Imagine you got two classes of students. Now, both classes have the exact same average test score, 70%. But in Class A, everyone's really consistent. They all score right around that 70%. But in Class B, the scores are all over the map. You got some kids getting 40%, others getting 100%. The average is identical, but the story of Class B, the story of its variability, is completely different.
Right. So this got them thinking. What if the same thing is happening with our DNA? What if the spread of those little methylation switches, their variability, was just as important, maybe even more important, than their average setting?
And that is precisely the question a group of researchers decided to tackle. But they applied this idea not to cancer, but to obesity.
So here's the setup. They got two groups of young people, 48 who were obese and 48 who were lean. And then they went in and analyzed over 470,000 of these DNA methylation switches to see if there were any differences. But this time, they weren't just looking for changes in the average, they were also looking for changes in that variability.
And let me tell you, what they found? It was a total game changer.
And just look at the sheer scale of this, which you can see in this Venn diagram. They found, over 23,000 sites where the average was different. That's the classic signal they expected. But, and this is the amazing part, they also found over 28,000 new sites where the variability was the thing that was different. This wasn't some tiny little effect. This was a massive, completely hidden signal.
Okay, so what does this actually look like in the data? Let's take a peek, because seeing it makes all the difference.
All right, so first, let's look at the classic example again. This is a site with a different average. The red dots for the obese group are just consistently higher than the black dots for the lean group. Pretty straightforward, right?
Okay, but now look at this. This chart is the big discovery. Check out the average settings, those dashed lines. They're almost exactly the same, but look at the red dots for the obese group. They are all over the place, wildly inconsistent and unstable compared to that tight little cluster from the lean group. This is a differentially variable site.
In this scatter plot right here, it gives you the 30,000-foot view. The vertical axis is the difference in variability, and the horizontal one is the difference in the average. And you can just see that a huge number of these sites are scattered way up high on the chart, meaning they have way more variability in the obese group. The signal of instability was just incredibly strong.
To put a number on it, get this. A whopping 68.3% of all those sites with wonky variability, they were more unstable in the obese individuals.
And here's the kicker, the final proof that this really matters. They basically tested which signal was better at predicting if a person was in the obese group or the lean group. And as you can see from these charts, the new variability signal on the bottom performed just as well, actually a tiny bit better, than the classic average signal on top. It's an equally powerful, brand new clue.
Okay, so this is all really fascinating science, but what does it actually mean? Why should we care about finding this new kind of signal?
Well, for one, it gives us a brand new tool, a whole new lens to look through to identify disease risk. This idea of epigenetic instability, it might be the missing piece of the puzzle that explains how our environment, diet, lifestyle, stress, actually talks to our genes to cause disease. It also makes the known links between obesity and other diseases like type 2 diabetes and even some cancers much stronger because this exact same pattern of instability is a hallmark of those diseases too. It kind of suggests that for a lot of complex diseases, this instability might be the rule, not the exception.
And all of this really leaves us with one huge, fascinating question to chew on. Now that we know to look beyond the simple average, what other incredible secrets about our health and about disease are just waiting there to be discovered? Not in the average, but in the beautiful, complex, and sometimes chaotic variation of our own biology.